Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I want to talk about Drive to Survive Season 6. Just finished watching the newest season. Just kind of talking about each episode and kind of give my thoughts on the new season. Of course, this will include spoilers as well, so just in case you haven't watched it yet and you don't want to know what it's about, I would advise stop watching the video here. But of course, if you've watched, then feel free to carry on. So 10 episodes. Total, same as all the other seasons have been. So I'm just going to kind of go down episode by episode and just kind of give my thoughts overall. So the first episode was called Money Talks, and this episode was really focused around Aston Martin and their start to the season and Lance Stroll's wrist injury. Honestly, I thought it was a pretty interesting episode. They obviously had a couple of interviews with Lawrence Stroll as well. You know, the usual kind of stuff. Notice that they had two new narrators this year. So of course, Will Buxton has always been there since the very beginning as one of the key journalist narrators for the series. But they had Claire Williams, a long time since she's been in the paddock, so that was kind of a pleasant surprise. They also had Danica Patrick, and I'll give my thoughts on that kind of at the end. So that was the first episode. That was Aston Martin. Second one was called Fall from Grace, and this was about Nick De Vries's half season, kind of his struggles, and eventually being replaced by Daniel Ricciardo. And of course, that actually included footage from the pivotal Silverstone test that kind of led to Ricciardo getting that Alpha Tauri seat. They had a couple of strange episodes with, not episodes, but they had this kind of strange scene with De Vries cleaning his apartment for what seemed like 4 or 5 minutes. So that was a bit of a strange one, not sure if it was super relevant, but you know, that's the way it is. They also had some interesting interviews with Albon and Gasly talking about how cutthroat the Red Bull kind of system is. So I thought that was fairly insightful. Moving on to episode 3, it's called Under Pressure, and this one really focused on McLaren and their struggles to start the season, going all the way basically from car launch, where they're like, yeah, our car is terrible. We're gonna suck for the first bit of the season. Something that I did notice, and I think it really depended on who was involved, but they basically had a conversation between Zach Brown and Lando Norris on a golf course in Miami, and it was one of these conversations that was very manufactured. Like, they basically been like, we want you to talk about this just so we have some footage, basically. And some people are able to make it look very natural, make it look like it's just kind of spontaneously shown up out of nowhere, while others, I think this one was one of the worst ones, I think, in terms of that, between Norris and Zach Brown, where it was clear that they'd basically been asked to talk about this on this golf course. And like, you don't really get a ton of insightful information, but it's basically there to kind of provide some background information about kind of what's going on and try to make it look as natural as possible. And they had quite a few of these throughout this season. Now, what else? They also finished that episode off with the British Grand Prix, which is nice to see, kind of make it show a bit more positive, of course, with Norris's podium, as well as their fantastic result in qualifying that race. Number 4 was the last chapter, and this was the episode about basically Haas and Gunther Steiner. Not a whole lot about the drivers, but mostly just Gunther. They also had a bit with James Vowles and Williams, I thought that was pretty interesting. A lot of the episode was basically, comparing and contrasting the two styles of the two team principals. Honestly, I thought it was really interesting from James Vowles' side. You kind of got a sense of the kind of person he is, kind of his personality, quite nerdy, quite geeky, very particular about certain things. Kind of like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory in some ways, but obviously not quite as extreme. Just very, quite particular about certain things, like his eating habits, saying, oh, I'll have avocado today, oh, I can't have caffeine except on this day, things like that, things that were just kind of quirky that I thought were interesting. I think they had some really good context as well from Claire Williams, that episode, kind of talking about the struggles of Williams, the team, of course, she being basically a part of that team for such a long time, obviously would know that team very, very well. Now, episode 5 was titled Civil War, and this was basically about the rivalry and the relationship between Ocon and Gasly. A pretty interesting episode. You could definitely see when they were putting, from the footage of this episode, that you can see that there's quite a bit of tension between the two drivers. They did a segment where they were karting in Normandy, which I think was basically on Sky Sports. Unfortunately, I don't watch Sky Sports, so I didn't actually get to see this, but I assume that's what it was. And yeah, and basically Gasly crashed Ocon out there, or Ocon basically crashed on his own there. So that was interesting. They did the Monaco podium there. They also, of course, did the Australia crash. I noticed that Laurent Rossi was in this quite a lot. For a guy who is not a team principal, he's basically like the CEO of Alpine, a bit like Lawrence Stroll kind of inserting himself in instead of Mike Crack. But you know, it was a bit odd seeing him there. Quite a lot of footage for Rossi there. Next, so that was the first. Yes, there's two. That was the first episode for Alpine. Episode 6 was called Leap of Faith, which I think, unfortunately, as of now, right before the start of the season, has kind of aged very poorly. And it was called Leap of Faith, and it was really about Mercedes and Lewis's basically contract renewal with Mercedes and how 2023 was going so poorly. Would he resign? Would he not resign? Of course, he would eventually resign for 2024, but then sign for Ferrari for 2025. So I think a lot of the storylines from that episode kind of just went right out the window after with Hamilton signing for Mercedes. Talking about the rebuilding, they did the Spain podium and talking about how Hamilton would never leave Mercedes, which of course we know will happen at the end of this year. But of course, for the producers, there's nothing they can really do about that. They probably decided to have that episode set aside well before, like months and months before, he even signed for Ferrari. Then we get to episode 7. This is called C'est la vie, the second Alpine episode, really the only team. Yeah, I believe the only team that basically, well actually no, that's not true. AlphaTauri did technically have 2 episodes, but yeah, them and AlphaTauri, 2 episodes each basically. And this was talking about the struggles of the team, continued struggles of the team. So like they never really looked that good in this season. They did the British Grand Prix, double DNF there. Gasly comes on the radio saying, "I need more power." Yeah, that's going to be something they probably say quite a lot this year as well. Then they do the Hungarian Grand Prix where they crashed into each other. I'd actually forgotten about that. They crashed on the opening lap. So yeah, not a great look for Alpine. And of course they did the Belgian Grand Prix where they basically axed Otmar Szafnauer mid-weekend. So yeah, not a great look. But of course, to try to make it more positive, they ended up on talking about the Dutch Grand Prix as well. So those were the 2 episodes about Alpine. Obviously, I don't think they painted them in a great light, but you know, that's the way it is. Number 8, episode 8 was Forza Ferrari, of course, all about Ferrari. They talked about the Italian Grand Prix and they talked about the Singapore Grand Prix. So two interesting ones there. Of course, with Ferrari winning and Sainz winning that Singapore Grand Prix. They did an intro introducing Fred Vasseur, of course, being the new team principal at Ferrari. I thought it was quite interesting. You know, you kind of get to see some of his personality. There's kind of a scene towards the beginning where she's talking with some I guess PR person, I think, at Ferrari, and she's talking to him in Italian. He's responding in English, and he's like, "Oh, we need you to talk Italian," and he probably doesn't speak Italian at a high enough level to be able to do that. So he decides to just say Forza Ferrari at the end of every sentence as some kind of joke. So yeah, that was quite good. They also had these kind of scenes at the very beginning and at the very end where they basically had like locals talking about what they thought about Fred Vasseur and about Ferrari. So you can see the really big contrast between before Singapore and after Singapore. So probably a little bit fabricated, but still I thought it was an interesting scene, and I think it really kind of tried to help show and highlight the passion that Italians have for Ferrari, which is a very unique relationship that other teams don't really have. Then we get to episode 9, called Three's a Crowd, and this one really centered around Ricciardo's hand injury and Lawson coming in as a substitute. I think it definitely it was an interesting episode that they showed Lawson's family. It was focused a lot of it was on Lawson. I think his interviews were quite direct, kind of talking about he really thought he should have been in that seat, which I don't know how that will go. I think he'll be fine, but yeah, I think honestly a pretty interesting episode. They of course covered Singapore, Japan, and Mexico, as well as the Dutch Grand Prix, and there's quite a few races in there. Episode 10, the final one, called Red or Black, coincidentally lined up very well with the Vegas Grand Prix. as well as with the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix to finish up the year, of course, with Red and Black being, things that you do with casinos. So yeah, it was talking about Mercedes and Ferrari and their battle for second in the constructors. Pretty interesting episode. Not a whole lot that we didn't really get to see, but they did include the press conference from the Vegas Grand Prix with the team principals. Honestly, they included quite a bit of it, and it was quite interesting how the guys constantly asking, the interviewers basically constantly trying to ask Fred Vasseur for a positive comment about the weekend, and he basically wouldn't have any of it. He wouldn't say anything more than he was very frustrated, very upset. You also had the Toto basically beside him, basically trying to prop up the Grand Prix and saying how great it was. And then you had a scene right at the end when there was some woman on the grid basically just told him, "Oh yeah, thank you for talking so positively about Vegas." So that was a bit of an interesting dynamic there, and I think there's definitely something that we did see over the course of that Grand Prix weekend. And then just to finish up the final episode, they basically talked about Abu Dhabi, the fight between Mercedes and Ferrari, and then this fight between McLaren and Aston Martin for fourth. So, a nice episode to kind of finish up. Of course, I think for me, the best part about Drive to Survive is getting to see the behind the scenes stuff, seeing the stuff that you don't normally would see just from watching the races and interviews. Of course, for more casual fans who don't watch every race or just kind of getting into it, seeing all of that stuff together can be really important. But for more hardcore fans, of course, it's more the behind the scenes stuff, which is kind of why we watch the series. And I think as a whole, I think it was a pretty good season. I thought they did a really good job of covering some of the big main stories from the 2023 F1 season. Not a whole lot of manufactured rivalries, drama like we saw during the COVID years, unfortunately. Like I remember, I think season 3 or season 4, they basically made up a rivalry between Sainz and Norris and tried to make them hate each other, which of course was the farthest thing from the truth. But I think it was really good that they've kind of gone away from that. For Danica Patrick, I don't think she did a great job. I know why she's there. She's a woman. She's American. She's someone that maybe a casual American viewer may see and recognize from her time in NASCAR, her time in IndyCar. But that being said, I do think they could have had a lot more people. There's a lot more people, a lot of women even, who could have done a much better job in that role. I know they had Jenny Gao early on. There's others they could have had, like Naomi Schiff, who's on Sky Sports commentary. They could have had, there's numerous women from the Sky team or the F1 team who they could have had instead of her. So it just felt like kind of a strange choice, especially since she has never really had a kind of connection with F1 for a long time. But that's the way it is. I think obviously just talking about what wasn't there is a bit also interesting as well. So Alfa Romeo was basically non-existent. Bottas had a couple of radio snippets here and there. I don't think he was interviewed once. Zhou wasn't interviewed either. So they were basically just non-existent from the entire series. Verstappen also very little. Perez very little as well. Verstappen had a little bit of snippets here and there. Of course, that Perez's struggles and would he, will he, won't he be replaced at the end of the season could have been included as well. But for a variety of reasons, probably they decided not to include it. I think another notable admission that I think kind of surprised me was that they never really included an actual full-on episode with Logan Sargent. The one episode talking about Williams was really focused on James Vowles, not on Logan Sargent himself. And you would think that, given that they have Danica Patrick and they're trying to market to an American audience, they would try to have an episode talking about this American driver. And while they did pretty much an entire episode talking about Nick DeVries, you would think, why wouldn't they do one? It's on Logan Sargent, right? Of course, he didn't have a great season, so it's kind of harder to find more positive storylines. But they could have spun something out of the COTA race, him getting his first points in F1 as well. So there's that. So overall, I think a solid season, definitely a step up from some of the seasons in the past. And yeah, I think most fans would like it. I think I don't know. I guess unless you're an Alpine fan, probably wouldn't enjoy it too much, perhaps. But yeah, that's all for my review of Season 6 of Drive to Survive. Of course, the F1 season starts this week. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.